Republicans hang on to a House seat in Tennessee after a special election Tuesday, but were voters sending the GOP a message with their double digits shift toward the Democrats? Plus, facing a threat of tariffs by President Trump, Britain's Labour Party agrees to pay more for U.S. made pharmaceuticals.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, columnists Bill McGurn and Alicia Finley. Tennessee's 7th House District was won by President Trump by 22 points last year, so it was a jolt when polls showed a neck-and-neck race between Republican Matt Van Epps and Democrat Aftyn Behn in a special election to replace the retired Congressman Mark Green. Speaker Mike Johnson went down to Tennessee to campaign, even put President Trump on speakerphone at one event. And the result Tuesday was not quite as close as those polls had suggested, with Van Epps winning by about 9 points. Here he is in his victory speech on Tuesday night, crediting President Trump for this victory.
Our victory was powered by supporters of President Trump turning out to vote. The president built the largest, most diverse coalition to ever elect a Republican, and we leaned in on that. President Trump was all in with us, and it made the difference. In Congress, I'll be all in with him. Thank you.
Bill, your column in Monday's newspaper was on this race under the headline, "A House Cliffhanger in Nashville." Obviously, that was before we knew the outcome. But from your perspective, what was the story of this special election?
Well, I think there's a couple of stories. One, I wouldn't have myself use the word cliffhanger because I didn't believe it would be a cliffhanger. The last poll that we had going into the election showed the Republican with 2 points more than the Democrat. But the Republicans mobilized voters. As you say, it's a 9-point lead. Notre Dame won this weekend. Sorry, Alicia, as they beat Stanford. Stanford cut the gap at the end. It was 40 something to 20, but it was still a victory. You know, it might not have met 50-point ledge, but it was still a victory. I think that was the same. I don't think voters go to send a message. I do think, though, what it shows is a weakness, a softness, not necessarily a tragic flaw, but the president seems to have, I wouldn't say forgotten, de-emphasized his economic message. You know, Reagan's famous line when he ran the second time, "Are you better off than you were before?" You know, and I think many Americans may be, but they don't feel that way. And I think that showed the softness. So what everyone's really looking at it for is 2026. Look, the woman that they ran, they couldn't find anyone nuttier. You know, hates country music, hates Christianity. They ran it. I mean, if a Republican, like when I was in the White House with Karl Rove, if Karl could pick a Democrat to run against, this is the kind of person he wants. But I think it showed a fear that Republicans have to get their message through, or else they're vulnerable to affordability attack.
But to that point, it is the swing, Alicia, that I think has gotten people's attention here. A district that Trump won by 22 points. Mark Green, the predecessor of the now Congressman-elect, won it by similar margin. And so the shift from that to a 9-point victory, a double-digit move by this district away from the Republicans and toward the Democrats. And particularly, as Bill lays out, given that the Democratic nominee here was pretty far to the left, was attacked for statements in 2020, for example, calling to dissolve the police force, saying in 2019 that Tennessee is a racist state, and then saying she didn't like Nashville. Here she is on CNN, asked about the remarks to that effect in a podcast several years ago.
I hate the city. I hate the bachelorettes. I hate the pedal taverns. I hate country music. I hate all of the things that make Nashville, apparently, an it city to the rest of the country, but I hate it.
I know you said those comments were taken out of context, but I want to ask you about it because I'm wondering, do you think it was a mistake to say that?
Once again, I was a private citizen. Nashville is my home. Do I roll my eyes at the bachelorette parties and the pedal taverns that are blocking my access to my house? Yeah, every Nashvilleian does. But this race has always been about something bigger. It's about families across Middle Tennessee that are getting crushed by rising prices, while Washington politicians and billionaires argue about this type of nonsense. And so, once again, I've been steadfast and dogged in my message about addressing the affordability crisis in Tennessee. And like I said, the race is close because that is what I've been doing.
Alicia, pretty smooth answer there by the candidate, pretty focused. But given that kind of record, she had been dubbed the AOC of Tennessee. It is surprising, again, that the margin of Republican victory has shrank so much.
Right. So I think there were a few things that went on here. One, I think you had really high Democratic turnout. They were motivated, and we've seen that in other special elections this year, as well as in the Virginia and New Jersey gubernatorial races, where you had high Democratic turnout. Then you had probably somewhat lower Republican turnout than in at least 2024, where I think Trump did help really get out his base, his MAGA base. Some of those did end up coming out at the end, as Bill mentioned. And the third thing is, I think independents ended up shifting more toward Democrats. If you recall last year, one of the reasons why Trump actually won in many of the swing states, and Republicans were actually won in some swing districts, is because independents swung for Republicans. And that was because of concerns about inflation. They were pocketbook voters, as well as some concerns about the immigration, the border not being under control. But the problem is, the broader problem is that you've seen in a lot of the polling, as well as in these special elections, that independents have now swung back for the Democrats because they don't think the Republicans are actually tackling the problems that they voted them into office to address.
Bill, to the point about the 2026 midterms, some analysts have looked at the special elections that have taken place in 2025 so far and suggested that if this size and magnitude of swing away from Republicans carries forward through the 2026 midterms, that could mean a net gain for Democrats of something like 40 seats, which starts to look like a wave election. Kind of has some echoes of what happened in 2018, perhaps, the first midterm after President Trump's initial victory there in 2016. And it can totally swamp the kind of marginal trench warfare on gerrymandering that both parties are now engaged in. They're redistricting Texas and California, maybe Indiana, trying to pick up 1 seat or 2 seats or 3 seats here and there. When the real focus, in my mind, ought to be on how do we make sure we prove to voters that we are making their lives better and that we deserve another term, because the shifts in voter sentiment of that size totally swamp what you can do through the redistricting process.
Yeah, I'll go on a limb here. I don't think Democrats are going to get anywhere near those numbers. It's a big wave or something. Now, partly I'm going on a limb because no one will remember what I said here today, and no one can hold it against me. But I think a lot can happen in a year. The broader point, I think, the economic message, I was surprised to see President Trump attack affordability as a Democratic hoax. And I think he's right in terms, will their policies make it more affordable for working people? No, of course not. They never do. But I think it resonates because what do families look at? College costs for their kids, costs of a new home. And these costs have them worried. Inflation is not totally whooped. It's down about half what it was at the end of Biden's term, but it's still out there. People feel uncertain. And I think Republicans have to give an answer. And as an example, I think one of the answers they have to have is on healthcare. It's a big part of the economy. Costs are going up. They're right. I think Republicans have said there's nothing affordable about the Affordable Care Act, but they haven't come up with the market-based reform or better yet, a market-based alternative to what we have. And I think if they could get that would go a long way to preempting some of these claims. And we have to talk about it. You have to sell it to the American people and say, why is it not working today? What is driving up costs? And how are we Republicans going to fix it? I mean, it's been more than decade and a half, almost coming up on 2 decades since Obamacare passed. And we have no coherent response for it.
I take Bill's point that it is a long way still until the 2026 midterms, and many events can intercede to change voter sentiments. But Alicia, even if the shift is not 40 seats toward Democrats, remember how thin the Republican House margin that Speaker Mike Johnson holds is. Right now, there are 219 Republicans to 213 Democrats. So a flip of 3 seats would tie the House of Representatives right now. There are a few, that does not include a few vacancies, including the one that was left by Mark Green when he retired in Tennessee. So once Mr. Van Epps is sworn in, that would make it 220 Republicans. But still, I mean, even a shift of 4 or 5 points in some of these marginal seats, these majority making seats, would be enough to flip the control of the House of Representatives and make Hakeem Jeffries the next Speaker of the House. So Republicans watching this, I mean, another takeaway that they might have from Tuesday's results and the results of other special elections this year is if we want to get something done with this control that we currently have of both sides of Congress and the White House, we have maybe a year to get that bill over the finish line. I don't know what they would prioritize, if that would be a second reconciliation package, if that would be some kind of permitting bill. But the odds of a post-midterm Trump agenda getting through the House look a lot lower, I think, than they did even a few months ago.
Well, I think that's right. And you recall in 2017, the special elections, Democrats won most of those. And that was a bit of a premonition for the 2018 Democratic wave, which was partly just a repudiation of Donald Trump, not so much of his policies, but the man himself and the chaos that he unleashed. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Now, I think the broader problem is Republicans don't appear to have an agenda. We don't really know what they want. I mean, there's talk about maybe them bringing up some permitting reforms next week, though the issue there is most of those would require 60 votes in the Senate to pass under the budget reconciliation procedures, because they don't have they have more than a quote unquote incidental effect on the budget. So it's not clear to me that they would actually be able to enact any of those. Now, when you start to consider, well, what they do through budget reconciliation, and that mainly affects tax bills or spending bills, some kinds of reforms, maybe to Medicaid, but they haven't really put anything out there. And that's in part because they're a little bit lost in the wilderness. There are fractures in the party. Some do not want to touch Medicaid again with this, a 10-foot pole, because they view it as too controversial, and that there are MAGA voters who are on Medicaid, and they are already kind of worried that, well, they're going to get beat up in the midterms next year over the changes that they did make, small beer as they were in the tax bill. So they don't really want to do that. So, well, okay, what about taxes? And no, there's been a lot of intellectual attrition in the House over the years, by, as Paul Ryan, Kevin Brady, Pat Toomey, other Republicans who really helped steer the 2017 tax bill have left, resulting in kind of an intellectual vacuum. And so they don't really know on tax policies. They don't really know what they want to do there. I mean, I'd throw out maybe, indexed capital gains tax for inflation. That could help. Another idea is at least try to repeal some of the tax increases that Biden imposed, or Democrats imposed as part of the IRA, which would be the corporate alternative minimum tax, which has just created all kinds of distortions and has in some ways negated the benefits of their tax bill. But they don't really seem to want to do anything on there because they don't want to be accused of doing, helping the rich. So I think that their problem is that they realize that the voters are concerned about affordability, but they don't really have an agenda to address it.
A couple other thoughts I would add on the challenge for Republicans in the midterms. One is just the Trump bull in a china shop in Washington, D.C., day in and day out. I mean, this week he pardoned the former president of Honduras, who'd been convicted of allegedly helping import 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. He was asked about why he did that, and he suggested that it was a Biden setup. That was about the extent of his explanation for this pardon. It seems like we're about to get a report about the defense secretary's infamous signal chat talking about some impending strikes, I believe, in Yemen. These charged immigration raids, Bill, in cities across the country, including deportations of people who are in the country illegally but do not seem to have committed other crimes, sending them to places like that prison in El Salvador. The effort to push National Guard troops into cities that don't want them. And then on the point about affordability, I mean, one that I would add is the tariffs, which for the most part, to my eye, seem like they are a 1-2 punch of Trumpian chaos, with also undermining the ability of people to buy things cheaply. I mean, they've backed off some on products like Brazilian coffee, which are not even made in the United States. But still, I think a challenge for the administration, notably Costco now, is the latest company to file a lawsuit to make sure that if those tariffs get struck down, the emergency ones by the Supreme Court, that Costco can get a refund. Bill, I mean, I think that that's a messaging problem for the administration when people are going to the grocery store, going to big box stores, and seeing prices continually to go up, and then they see this headline: Costco suing over tariffs.
Yeah, it's kind of the same problem we're having with the drug war. When you pardon a guy convicted on these charges of helping all these drugs come in the U.S., right, and you pardon him, it gives a conflicting message. And tariffs, that's been the problem. Like, yes, they can have good effects. Trump has used them sometimes effectively, but they can also do a lot of damage. And basic economic theory is that we're not smart enough to know what's going to be damaging and what isn't. You know, it catches up with you. So I think there's a mixed message there. In the beginning, we're hearing all about successes, which is primarily another country threatened with tariffs that does something Trump wants and gets tariff relief because of it. But now you can see it's having economic effects, and they can be really hard for a lot of American people because it's going to fall on American people, mostly if things are more expensive.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at, Alicia, I would argue that part of the difficulty is that the tariffs seem to have been willy-nilly and unstrategic. I mean, it's Liberation Day, and so the retaliatory numbers are announced, and then the markets get a little spooked, and then those numbers are off, and then we're going back into the back room, and they're changing all the time. It doesn't seem like there is a huge deal of strategic thinking put behind them. And it's easier to make the argument to the public that these higher costs are for something if you can point to the strategy. And so notably, one exception I would say is this deal now this week with Britain. Explain what the Trump administration has now signed, notably with the Labour Party of the UK.
Right. And to your first point, we have all kinds of businesses who come in and say, well, we can deal with a 10% flat across the board tariff if that's it, and that's going to stick. It's the changing or the shifts, one day on, one day off, the rates changing. Here, I think this does provide a little more, this deal between the UK and the US, which I would say is a win-win, does provide a little more certainty to both sides. What it does is it says, well, we will not impose Section 232 tariffs on pharmaceutical products or medical devices that come in from the UK. Now, these haven't already been imposed. Trump has threatened to using a separate tariff authority. And he's also saying we will not impose or use Section 301 authorities under the trade laws, and those, recall, were used to impose tariffs on China during the first term under the rationale that China was discriminating against the U.S. So we will not use Section 301 authorities to impose tariffs on British pharmaceutical products either. This is a win for, by the way, American consumers, as well as the pharmaceutical industry, as well as being a win for the UK. Now, in return, what the UK agreed to was that it will agree to pay 25% more for US, or it's not just US, all kinds of medicines, which has long been kind of a bugaboo for pharmaceutical companies. The UK pays among the lowest prices in the developed world for products, and which means that companies have to charge higher prices in the US as a result. And Trump has long complained this amounts to free riding, and he has a point. They're essentially getting some of the same products as we do at much lower prices. Now, they also have to wait longer, and in many cases, they aren't getting the same drugs because companies are just refusing to sell it at such low prices. Because they can't actually even make money, or it's basically at cost or even below cost for them to produce. Now, all that aside, basically they are easing their price. UK is agreeing to ease their price controls, which benefits U.S. companies and will benefit U.S. consumers insofar that they don't have those same companies don't have to charge as higher prices in the U.S. To offset the discounts that the UK is getting. And so I think that this kind of deal could be replicated with Europe, and maybe even Canada, these other countries with government-run systems, and is a far superior outcome than Trump's proposed most favored nation plan, which would just essentially import their foreign price controls into the U.S.
To second that point, Bill, it seems to me like this is a reasonable way to attack this long-standing problem that you have pharma companies in the United States that are facing essentially price controls from government-run healthcare systems abroad. And what you often hear, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle, but not exclusively, is, hang on, Britain is paying this much lower cost price for that drug than consumers are in the United States. Why don't we get that kind of deal from them? And it makes more sense to me to point out that this is an underpayment and a trade complaint. And so, using this threat of tariffs to equalize that seems like it makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, look, there's two Donald Trumps that we know about in these kind of negotiations. One of them cuts deals like this, where the end is a freer market all around. Maybe not totally free, but freer than it was before. And who benefits? Consumers and buyers of the product. The other Donald Trump is kind of, let's manage it better, and I can manage better than the Democrats. I think of Republicans. So when he does it first, we cheer. But I think it's confusing to voters, that there's two different approaches. And I think the Republicans have to rediscover the free market. It shouldn't be that controversial to say free market societies are superior. They produce better. They have all sorts of things. And we should be encouraging that, not discouraging. We're never going to win the battle. We're going to manage it better than they do. That's a zero-sum game. I think we have to get back to first principles. And I think Americans understand that. You make the market free, put the power in the hands of the consumer and everything, let people buy and sell as freely as they can. And that's the path to riches.
Thank you, Bill and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.